Okay, in this video we're going to talk about how to use the render to texture to transfer the high resolution detail of one object to another object which is a low polygon version of that same object. And so we'll be using render to texture, the projection modifier, and the cage to do that. In this case we're just going to kick out normal maps. And my two objects here are actually mapped exactly the same, but this particular object has a displace modifier on it and is high polygon. This one's the low polygon original version, so I want all this bumpy detail on here in a normal map. Real quick, let's take a look at our scene here, and we'll see what went into making these two objects. This particular object here is the original object. It's been UV mapped, so everything is mapped to fit on one texture map. The texture map itself looks like this. It's just a big rock face. I've used deep paint to clone over the edges in certain parts so that it's all seamless. My high polygon version is this same particular object, same object. Let's click on this guy. And I've added, there we go. I've added Turbo Smooth in the stack. You can see here's my unwrap, my edit poly. I've added Turbo Smooth on top and then Displace. The Turbo Smooth settings are just set to 2 iterations. In Displace, I've used a map that I created in the material editor, which is this map. It's a mix map that has noise and cellular mixed together, 38%. I've then dragged that map over to this map slot, made it an instance, and then controlled it from this slot. Also, in the displace parameters, I've had to use existing mapping, which is this checkbox here. That grays this out. Otherwise, my mapping will be screwed up on my displace modifier. So use existing mapping. I believe that's the only thing I hit. And this map here, I'll go through the map settings real quick for it. It's a noise setting. The scale was set to 7. It's a fractal noise. Everything else pretty much stays the same. And under my cellular setting, I've changed the circle characteristics, radio button. The size and the spread have been changed a little bit. And bump smoothing's at 1. I don't remember if that's the default or not. But the rest of it is the same, except the midpoint I've changed a little bit to give this more contrast, which makes this more bumpy. And in my mix amount, I'm using 38.5, so actually the cellular is a little bit more dominant than the noise. Okay? And that's been then dragged over to this slot right here, and it's an instance, so I can change everything over here, and it will affect the model. So that's how I got to this point here. This is bumpier, obviously, in higher detail than this one. Okay. Now, first thing we've got to do is we need to make sure that both versions of these are taking up the same space, or the coordinates are the same. So I'm going to zero out all the coordinates down here for my low poly, and I'm going to grab my high poly version and do the same thing. That way they're sharing exactly the same space. I can select them from here on out over here, and I'll click on low res. I want the low res one to be selected at this point. Alright, I'm going to hit 0 on my keyboard. That's going to bring up the render to texture dialog. It's also located under rendering, render to texture if you want to go there. And now we have to set some of these buttons. First thing you need to do is set the path. This is where the normal maps are going to be saved. So make that the folder wherever these original objects are located. Right there. You can click this button to do that. We're going to scroll down a little bit more. You'll see Low Res Mountain. That's our low res version, which is buried under my high res version right now. Should be selected, and it should be listed here. As we go down a little bit farther, you want this button to be enabled. Scrolling down a little bit farther, click Enabled under Projection, and we're going to hit the Pick button, which is going to allow us to pick which object we want to steal the normal map from. So in this case, it's going to be the high-res mountain, and we're going to click Add. That's then going to put that in here where the projection now knows what we're taking. We need to deselect or uncheck the sub-objects level box, this one. So that's not on. Make sure object level is on. And then we're going to click the Options dialog box. Here's where you pick which kind of normal map you want. You probably either want local or tangent. I have mine set to tangent, so that's what I usually use. But you can use local if you want. And we're going to close this at this point. Alright, and we're going to scroll down here a little bit more. We want the Use Existing Channel button. And then we're going to scroll on down a little bit farther and hit Add. We want to add a normals map. That's where we're telling Max what kind of map we want to add. You get your choice of all these others as well. And then we'll click Add Element or Elements. You can see there's our normals map. I'm going to scroll down a little bit farther, and under Sizing, I'm going to say Use Automatic Map Size. That's going to make it the same size as what I already had. A little bit farther down, we're going to check this box here, which is now telling Max that we need to export this as a normal map bump, not a regular bump. And then we're going to double check everything because I need to make sure everything's correct. I believe that's all the settings in here. Okay. Now you'll see that we've got a projection modifier over here. I'm going to close this window. Our projection modifier was added when we got out of that render to texture window. And a couple things are new now. We have a cage, which is this blue thing that's around my object, and we need to deal with this cage. That's like a great big projector that's now wrapped around our object that we want to project to. It's actually wrapped around the low poly version. But we need to make sure that it's big enough to encompass the high poly version. So I'm going to go down here where it says Cage under Projection. Make sure Cage is turned on. And I'm going to go down here to Amount, and where it says Reset, right in this area. I'm going to reset the cage first. It's actually sucked it down to the low poly version. Then I'm going to push the amount out until it looks like it's big enough to encompass the high poly version. And you'll see it's going to have to come out quite a bit. That looks like it might work. You can also shade the cage if you want to, if that helps you see it a little bit better. And what we're looking for is we don't want any areas sticking through the cage. And it's kind of hard to tell right now. I can tell there's actually a problem right there. You can see that the cage is kind of sticking into that area. If you want to get in there and deal with that a little bit more, you can go into the cage and select those pieces. It's hard to get in there. And move them a little bit. There we go. So you can move those pieces around if you want. I think what I'm going to do instead of doing that is I'm going to push this out a little bit more. You can also use %, which will kind of balloon this out a little bit more. So amount kind of shrinks it down and percent kind of balloons it up. And we're going to have to guess a little bit at this one. I seem to always have to guess a little bit when I first do this. Actually, it looks a little bit big. I think I'm going to try to shrink it down a little bit more. Okay. And so our cage is already set. But always reset it first. Otherwise, it's awfully hard to deal with it. Okay, now let's see what we have to work with here. I'm going to hit 0 again on my keyboard. That's going to bring back up the render to texture. And let's see what we have to deal with. I'm going to hit render. And the red areas here are where the cage isn't catching the detail properly. And so I need to deal with my cage a little bit more. I'm going to push the percent out a little bit, hit render again. And we're hoping that some of the red goes away. That looks pretty good. You can see I'm getting some detail. I've still got a little bit of red. Let's try and move this guy just down a little bit more. I still got some red. Alright. Let's push this guy a little bit more. We want to get rid of all the red if we can. There we go. I think that'll work for our needs. I don't want to waste too much more time with it. Okay, and now we've captured our normal map. You'll see it also made this an alpha channel. Now this is not the normal map. The normal map has now been put over here in our channel for the low poly version. So this is my low res version. I'm going to move my low poly version over here for a second. Okay. It made a baked material on here, and I'm going to switch over to the baked version. Let me make sure that's set. Yeah, the baked version in this case has the new material built into it. So if we take a look at this material, you will see that our texture map's the same as it was. And under normal bump, which is new, Max made that one for us. Let's go take a look at what it looks like. There's our bump map. Now you'll see that my bump map still has all the facets from the original model. We don't want that. I don't want it to look faceted. Let's zoom out here and take a look at both of these real quick so we can see them. Let's render those guys. And you'll see that I've captured the bump map. It's actually bumpy. It's not going to change the profile. Bump maps don't do that. But I have made it bumpy. But I'm getting the faceted pieces built in here from my, my original map. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go down to Edit Poly. And real quickly, I'm going to grab all these polygons. And I'm going to apply a smoothing group to them. Unclick that, go back up to the top. I'm going to close this real quick. I'm going to put this back at 0 so we're all back where we started. Hit 0 for my render to texture, which doesn't come up, so I'll go over here. And we'll scroll down, make sure all my settings are the same. Okay. And I'm going to hit render this time. This time I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm going to render it to the source this time. Output into source, which is a little bit easier, I think. I'm going to hit render. We'll overwrite that file. It's going to render pretty much looking the same as it did last time. That's what we want to see. And this time, close that. Make sure that I've got the right material here. Move this guy over to the side so we can see him a little bit better. Okay, here's my material. My low-res version, I'm going to look at the normal map here. And you'll see that I got rid of those facets, which is what I want. And now I have a normal mapped version of my model. Let's get a little bit closer to it so we can see the difference. This model over here has the normal map baked into it, and it's a seamless normal map because it was built off of my my original UV coordinates. And here's my normal map on the high-res version. And you can see this particular model has, let's see how many polygons that guy has. He's got, oh, I put polygon counter over here. He's got nearly 15,000 polygons in it. This particular one over here has 500 polygons in it. And so it's a big difference. But only thing I'm giving away is the silhouette. So everything from this model has been baked into this model. And that's the normal pipeline for getting a normal map. Again, I find the process a little bit convoluted in Max. I don't particularly like that render to texture dialog. But once you get it right the first time, it's not the hardest thing to do. It's just that screen is a little confusing to figure everything out. But that's how you do it. So rendering normal maps from a high polygon object onto a low